Is going on, everyone? Welcome back to this week's installment on the Lake Show, and I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day. And yeah, it's me. I'm back. I'm finally back on YouTube, and I'm finally back making episodes, at least for the time being. I mean, there was a lot of moving pieces going on in my life, mainly having to do with, work and my new schedule that was coming out, and, just the time constraints that I have, that were currently going on in my life. That's the whole reason why I haven't been on YouTube the past 2 months. It's nothing that nobody did. It's not that I lost enjoyment in doing this. It's just the fact that I got so busy so quickly that, I felt like taking a step back and just getting a feel for my new schedule at work and just a bunch of other moving parts in my personal life. I felt like it was a good time to take a step back from YouTube, take a little break from YouTube, take a little hiatus, especially because 2 months ago, there was nothing really going on in the sports world that I personally cover. I know baseball's in full swing, which is nice. The NBA wrapped up back when I was talking about that. But there was nothing, too crazy going on 2 months ago in regards to the sports world that I personally talk about. And I knew it was a decent time to, take a step back, relax a little bit from YouTube, from doing this. But it's not that I, lost love for doing it. It's just the fact that I had so many moving parts in my personal life and my new schedule at work for, the hours that I work. I just put a time constraint on what I was able to put out on YouTube. So I felt like it was a good time to take a step back. But I am back for, I'd say, this week. It's probably going to be another 2-3 weeks before another episode comes out, before I finally get more consistent, just because I'm working on a little rebranding aspect of my channel. It'll probably be named something different, or I might keep the same name. I don't know. I might let everybody in the comments section, leave their opinion on that. Whether should I change the name? Should I not change the name? But I definitely will be coming up with a new look, a new feel. Unfortunately, I don't have that kind of money to purchase a podcast studio, but I do still have my good setup, thanks to my dad and my grandmother. I appreciate that. But just this, the look and feel, it's gonna look and feel a little bit different, mainly from the intro to the outro to everything in between that I like to edit. Just a couple things. I want to do a little bit of rebranding and, reinventing the wheel almost when it comes to my channel. I'm still going to be talking sports, still going to be talking, football, college football, NFL. It's going to be a great time. And again, praise the one true God, Lord Jesus Christ. I really appreciate him for being by my side and just with me every single step of the way through, hard times, through stressful times. He's the reason that I'm still here today. He's the reason that I'm still able to do this and get enjoyment out of all the things that he's provided me in my life. All the true blessings that have come from him, everything good that I have, and everything good that I try to do, it's all because of Jesus Christ. It's all because of my Lord and Savior, and I give all praise and all glory and all thanks to him for just allowing me to continue striving in this life, trying to do, the Father's will. It's just a fun time. I get all the enjoyment I can out of life, and he's the reason why. And it's kind of crazy. I haven't said this in a while. You all know I'm still a Bucked Up ambassador, so use promo code SHOW32. Get yourself 20% off any and all pre-workout orders at buckedup.com. So now that I'm back for this week, again, I told you it's going to be probably another 3 weeks, maybe a month until I'm back on YouTube in full swing and, in a good consistent weekly schedule. But, I do still plan eventually to release weekly episodes. It's just the fact that I just got to get to that point again with my work schedule, my personal life, that I have all those aspects going on. It's gonna take some work. So just bear with me, guys. I thank you for still supporting the channel. I still appreciate everybody watching those videos and liking and commenting on them. It feels great, and I really appreciate all the support still. I'm at 215 subscribers on YouTube. I'm looking to, propel that to 300, then 400, then 1,000, and continue to get it going. And I really appreciate all of you for all of the support. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, NFL season is right around the corner, so we won't be diving in too much about that. but the NFL does start this Thursday, September 4th, and we got the Dallas Cowboys going on the road at Philadelphia. I think that's going to be a bloodbath, especially since Dallas just traded Micah Parsons away. That is one thing that I'll talk about at the end of the show, maybe, or I'll probably save that for during the NFL season when I finally make that episode. But NFL starts this Thursday with Dallas going on the road to Philly, and then we also have a Friday night matchup, Kansas City on the road against the Los Angeles Chargers, which should be a fascinating watch. I do have a lot of NFL takes that I will make in the coming weeks, but for now, we're going to jump right into what everybody's wanting to talk about, and that is college football week 1. And I have to say it was absolutely cinematic this past weekend. It was a fantastic slate of top 10 matchups that we had, and I'm going to be talking about 4 of the biggest games that are more notable. And to start off, we're going to kick things right off with the game that everybody was going to be watching, and it's just a shame that it was a noon game, and that is the number 1 Texas Longhorns going on the road to the defending national champion, number 3 Ohio State Buckeyes. So Ohio State ends up taking this game 14-7. This wasn't a, fireworks show that maybe a lot of people thought, but I definitely think that this told a lot about both teams right now. So a couple takeaways from this. Number 1, Ohio State, they're still very much alive for, possibly repeating as national champions, in my opinion. Their defense, the way their defense played against Arch and Steve Sarkisian's team, and their, just game planning and preparation, the Ohio State defense really showed up. The Ohio State defense suffocated Texas pretty much the entire day. There's a reason that Texas only went 1 for 5 on 4th downs this entire game, and a lot of those 4th downs, those were game changers. It's the whole reason that Ohio State was able to hold on. But I do think it was a little bit conservative of play calling by Brian Hartline in Ohio State, but again, with a freshman quarterback, you got to get him in his groove. You got to get him, accustomed to the offense. There were some throws that Julian Sayin could have made, like Jeremiah Smith going up the seam, where, at the end of that play, he was visibly frustrated, and then Julian Sayin was getting reamed at by Coach Ryan Day, which that's to be expected. You expect your young quarterback who, won the starting job to, make those kind of throws. And if Ohio State is to repeat as national champions or possibly win the Big Ten or, just in general make a college football playoff, Julian Sayin and Jeremiah Smith have to get on the same page. Jeremiah Smith only had, I think it was 2 receptions this entire game for like 22 yards, which, that's not going to be the normal. I'm going to assure you that Jeremiah Smith more than likely will win the Biletnikoff Award by the end of the year and possibly be a Heisman frontrunner. But one big takeaway I took from this is that Ohio State is still primed and ready. They are more than capable of going back-to-back as national champions, but they will probably have to address some things on that offensive line. Pass protection was a little shaky. Running the football was a little shaky. Again, Ohio State still had to replace like 14 draft picks in the NFL. So, your top 2 rushers, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, are no longer there. So it's a whole different slate of running backs now for Ohio State. The wide receiving core is still going to be the strength of this team. Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate. They are a stacked team still. And I do think they still have the 2 best players in college football, and Caleb Downs, safety, and wide receiver Jeremiah Smith. So that's my one big takeaway of Ohio State. They are primed and ready. They can definitely go back-to-back. They can definitely win the Big Ten. Now, they will definitely have to get more consistent because, this game was 14-7. Texas didn't play well. Ohio State didn't play well. This was a defensive battle that a lot of people suspected that it would be. So one of my big takeaways for the Buckeyes, they are definitely still the number 1 team in the nation. I think they're number 1. A lot of people might say LSU's number 1, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, another big takeaway I have for Texas is the fact that, I think that everybody does owe Quinn Ewers a little bit of an apology because, Arch Manning did not look good. 17 of 30 for, it was like 170 yards, one touchdown, one interception, but a good majority of 17 of 30 for 170 yards, one touchdown, one pick. He didn't look good. Arch Manning struggled in this game. But I will also say that Arch Manning's going to be fine. Texas is going to be fine. This was a top 10 matchup, a slugfest. If there's one thing I underestimated, it was the Texas Longhorns defensive line and defense in general. Like I said, this game was only 14-7. Texas had the ball with a little under 3 minutes remaining. They were driving to tie the game. It's not like that they were in a position where they had to play catch up the entire time, being down 3 scores. This was a one possession game pretty much the entire day. Ohio State, I knew Ohio State would win the game just based off the fact that with about 6 minutes left, they threw the ball to Cardinal Tate and got a touchdown and went up 14-0. But again, Arch Manning did show poise. He showed, he was able to, galvanize the troops. He put a touchdown drive together. Texas's defense did make a stop, but it's just the fact that Ohio State's defense made more stops. There's a couple plays where Arch Manning probably never makes that mistake. On a couple fourth downs, you see, on an RPO, run pass option, there were times where Arch should have pulled the football and hit the tight end in the flat. But again, I think that's a little bit different than, he only played in like a couple home games last year and threw passes in a couple home games. This was his first, true road game start. And, what tougher place could you ask someone to go start than Columbus in the Horseshoe? But overall, the story of this game is the defenses. I think Texas is going to be phenomenal. I think Ohio State's going to be phenomenal. I think we're looking at two teams that'll definitely still be in the college football playoff. Arch Manning will be fine. He didn't look that good, and I personally thought he sucked this game. But going forward, I don't think you're going to see Arch Manning play like this again. If you took the last name off of Arch, the expectations would have dropped significantly. It's the fact that he is a Manning, is the fact that why there are such high expectations. And I get it. He's a very talented quarterback. He really is. And I do think that he will be in the conversation for the Heisman Trophy by the end of the year. But we got to have realistic expectations. This was his first true road game as a starting quarterback. He's finally taking over for Quinn Ewers after sitting a whole year. And he's going up against the defending national champions on their home turf. You can't expect, perfection out of Arch Manning. Everybody thought that he was going to be we got guys like Paul Feinbaum saying he's going to be the best quarterback since Tim Tebow. Well, Tim Tebow won a national championship and a Heisman Trophy. I mean, can we pump the brakes just a little bit? We know Arch Manning is good, but can we give him a little bit more time to, come into his own and come to fruition? So those are my two big takeaways of realistically expectations for Ohio State and Texas. Both of them are going to be fine. I mean, Ohio State won the game. They'll definitely be fine. And I think they're the favorites to win in the Big Ten easily. And then you got Texas. I still think that they're top 2 in the SEC between them and LSU. But Arch will be fine. Texas will be fine. Julian's saying he's going to do okay. I think you're looking at two teams that'll definitely be in the college football playoff. All right, we're going to transition to Sunday night's game. I'm bouncing back and forth, but we're going to talk about the Sunday night game. We had the number 6 Notre Dame Fighting Irish going on the road to the number 10 Miami Hurricanes, and the Hurricanes handled business 27-24. This was a phenomenal game. This was, the biggest question marks coming into this game was about quarterbacks and was about defense. Realistically, everybody thought that Carson Beck was washed. Everybody, in Georgia, sometimes you just need to change the scenery. Whether that's a job, whether that's a school, whether that's a home, whatever it may be. Sometimes a change of scenery is everything it's all you need. Carson Beck played very well in this game and actually looked, he looked like how he did at the beginning of last year when Georgia stomped Clemson, and he looked a little bit like his 2023 form where they almost went to the national championship game, almost made the college football playoff. But Carson Beck went 20 of 31, 205 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Carson Beck's poise in the pocket, because this was just, it was great. It was fantastic. It's everything that a Miami fan such as myself wanted to see. It's everything that we needed to see. Just the way he was moving in the pocket when Notre Dame would send pressure. And he capitalized on a lot of man coverage that Notre Dame plays, and Notre Dame loves to play man coverage. You'll see them do that because they do have probably the best cornerback tandem in college football, but I really think the story of this game, while it's Carson Beck, while it's the Miami receiving corps, because there was just so many unknowns about it. The story of this game, I feel, was the Miami defense. Last year, Miami's defense was the Achilles heel and the whole reason that they did not make the college football playoff. I talked about it months ago when I told everybody I went to the game in Syracuse. All Miami had to do was win that game, and they would be in the ACC championship, and based off of that, they would have been in the college football playoff. But they choked a 21-point lead, and it was at no fault of Cam Ward whatsoever. It was the defense that completely, crapped the bed. The defense last year was putrid. This first game of the year against a top 10 opponent, against the runner-up national champions in Notre Dame, I feel like this was finally a statement win that Mario Cristobal can put on his shoulders. This was a overall great performance, and the Miami defense, while people, when they see Miami's defense last year, they were salivating because you could throw up and down the field and run all over Miami's defense last year. This is the time where Carson Beck got Miami into a position to kick a game-winning field goal to take the lead with a little over a minute left. At that point, this is where realistically all the planning, all the conversations, the entire offseason came to fruition. The hiring of defensive coordinator Corey Heatherman, we needed to see exactly what this defense was made of, and they absolutely stood up Notre Dame. They did it. This is everything that we needed the defense to do. This is everything that the Miami defense needed to do in general. They needed to prove that they can make a stop and that the offense doesn't have to play catch up or score 45 points a game. Sometimes you have to win close games like this with the defense. You can't always rely on your offense to be the biggest producers in a football game. The fact that the Miami defense stood its ground, and ended up forcing Notre Dame, Notre Dame ran out of time. It's simple as that. And the Miami defense is a big part of that. Yeah, they had some busts in coverage here and there, but it's just the fact that when it mattered most, Miami made a stop. Ruben Bain, defensive end, and defensive end Akeem Mesidor, those guys are going to be, I feel like Akeem Mesidor will be a top half draft, kind of draft pick. I think he'll go in 2 or 3 rounds. Ruben Bain is just a game wrecker and more than likely going to be a first round draft pick in next year's NFL draft. And it's already being, it's already said in a bunch of mock drafts that more than likely he is going to be a top draft pick. So kudos to the Hurricanes. Everybody thought Carson Beck was washed. I was not one of those who believed that. I did think that it was going to be tough just because this is Notre Dame we're talking about. They are no pushover. There is a reason Marcus Freeman has elevated that program and nearly won the national title last year against Ohio State. There's a reason. But I think that was a statement win by the Hurricanes. Okay, we can do this. This is the year that they can put something together and make the college football playoff. Now, on the flip side for Notre Dame, you're starting a freshman quarterback, CJ Carr. He went 19 of 30, 221 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. For the majority of the game, CJ Carr played great. I do think Notre Dame does need to tweak a little bit in their pass, coverage, because Miami did kind of have their way with the offensive line, at least when it comes to pass protection. CJ Carr was under duress for a lot of time, but again, for the freshman quarterback, I will say, he didn't play bad whatsoever. I think he's going to be a great quarterback for Notre Dame, and I think, Notre Dame, that it's go time. This was one of those games where at the end of the year we're going to look at it and say, like, how much this mattered when it comes to seeding purposes or who's in and who's not in the college football playoff. But one thing that I did take away is the fact that I don't know why that they didn't try to get Jeremiah Love involved a little bit more. He had 10 carries for 33 yards, and he had 4 receptions for 26 yards. They really leaned on their other running back, Jadarian Price, which, I mean, he averaged 7.5 yards a carry. Jeremiah Love averaged 3.5. So there's a big difference there. But at the same time, there's a reason Jeremiah Love is more than likely probably going to win the Doak Walker Award at the end of the year, is just because of how phenomenal of a running back he was. I don't understand why they kind of, drifted away from using him so much. But I do think it's just the fact that Miami was going to tee off whenever Jeremiah Love was in the game and force C.J. Carr to beat them. But I think Notre Dame, I still think they're going to be okay. They do have a test coming up against Texas A&M. So here's the rest. That's next week. The next game for Notre Dame is at home against Texas A&M. But realistically, that might be their do or die game of the year, because Texas A&M, they're ranked 19. Now, Texas A&M didn't look necessarily too great against UTSA, but they still handled business. But looking at the rest of Notre Dame's schedule, after Texas A&M, you got Purdue at Arkansas, Boise State, NC State, USC at Boston College, Navy at Pitt, Syracuse at Stanford. Realistically, with losing to Miami and the fact that Notre Dame does not play for a conference title game, so they don't have any automatic bid into the college football playoff, if they lose to Texas A&M and start the year 0-2, even if they were to run the table, I do not think it will be enough to propel Notre Dame into the college football playoff, because the two biggest games, Miami and Texas A&M, everybody would expect Notre Dame, to win all those games. I don't think that I think it's almost like a do or die time next week for Notre Dame. They have to beat Texas A&M. Otherwise, they don't have any big marquee win on the season to propel them, I feel like, in the college football playoff. There's a lot of pressure riding on that Texas A&M game next week. So just because they don't play for a conference championship game, if you're Notre Dame, you need all those wins that you can. You need as many of those top 10 wins as you can. But, just because it's do or die time, I feel like, for Notre Dame this early in the season. Now, that's not to say that something else can't happen. Other teams can't falter or fail. But this is a very important game. So, and one more takeaway I have for Miami is the fact that freshman Malachi Toney, 6 receptions, 82 yards, and a touchdown in his opening debut, him being only 17 years old, he's going to be an absolute stud for the Hurricanes for years to come. I think he made a statement in his opening game, in his debut, and his route running is just fantastic. The quickness from in and out of his breaks is just phenomenal. He's going to be one heck of a freshman going forward for the rest of the year. And in general, Miami, they proved that they can do it. And I think Notre Dame, I'm not going to say it's panic time in South Bend, but I do think if you don't beat Texas A&M next week, that your season is in deep, deep jeopardy. All right, now we're going to move on to LSU. We got the number 9 LSU Tigers going on the road to number 4 Clemson. And LSU snaps their 5-game, opening game losing streak. They lost 5 straight season openers, which is crazy to me. But they ended up beating the Clemson Tigers 17-10. LSU does look like the most well-rounded team right now in college football. Garrett Nussmeier, as a veteran quarterback, he made good decisions for the majority of the game. I really do think that LSU, you can probably make an argument that LSU will be in the top 5, maybe even the top 4 in the rankings in this upcoming week, but I was fairly impressed with how LSU played. I was very impressed, especially in the second half, because early on it looked like Clemson was going to run away with this, but I do think the lack of use of the transfer portal for Clemson is definitely going to be an Achilles heel again for Dabo Sweeney. I mean, there is a reason that they lost 3 games last year, but everybody, saying, the offensive line coming back, all the starters coming back for Clemson, Cade Klubnik in his senior year, everybody thought Clemson was going to be just a dominant force. Realistically, that was not the case. I was very shocked of how much that LSU's defense pushed Clemson around for the majority of that, especially that second half. LSU held Clemson to no points in the second half. Brian Kelly finally has a team that he can win a national championship with. I do think, I know he had Jaden Daniels, but that defense was not nearly as good as it is right now. Based off what LSU's defense did this past weekend, I don't see any reason that they can't compete for a national championship this year. I think Brian Kelly, he may have his most talented team ever. That includes the 2013 Notre Dame Fighting Irish when he was still in South Bend. But going forward, I do think LSU may be the team to beat in the SEC. And Clemson, and with all these matchups I'm talking about, I feel Notre Dame's going to be fine. Miami's going to be good. Ohio State's going to be good. Texas will be fine. I think Clemson will be okay. This is not necessarily, you're not going to face LSU every single week. You're not going to face a defensive line like LSU every single week. So I think Clemson, they'll still be fine. LSU may be the team to beat in the SEC. I was pleasantly surprised with how well they played in the second half. Great halftime adjustments, and that defense just pushed around Clemson's offensive line for the majority of that second half. Now, I talked about how, LSU's going to be fine, Clemson's going to be fine, Miami's going to be fine, Notre Dame, Texas, Ohio State. Those are 6 teams right there that all are going to be pretty good. And they were all in the top 10. There is one team in the top 10, however, that I do not feel good about, and I do not think will make the college football playoff, and I think it's time to actually hit the panic button in this program. Number 8, Alabama, the Crimson Tide, go on the road to the Florida State Seminoles. Florida State won 31-17, and this game was not close. It is not even remotely close to what that score shows. This was probably the most pitiful thing I've seen out of the Alabama Crimson Tide, especially over these past 2 years. The fact that it was bad enough that last year, Kalen DeBoer, he went 9-3 in his opening year with the Crimson Tide. That's bad enough. You missed the college football playoff. You missed the SEC championship. The Alabama faithful have been so used to national championships and just utter complete dominance in college football that, Kalen DeBoer has just not lived up to that expectation. Again, I'm not going to fully blame, put everything on Coach Kalen DeBoer just because you are asking a Pac-12 coach at the time, he was from Washington, and yes, he did make a national title game with Michael Penix and an amazing offense, but you don't have a Michael Penix. And just the fact you are taking a Pac-12 coach and you are trying to have him fill the shoes of the greatest college football coach in history, and Nick Saban, it is not going to pan out well. And it has not panned out well at all for Alabama. Ty Simpson, their starting quarterback, he didn't necessarily play that well. He went 23 of 43 for 2 touchdowns, 254 yards. He didn't play necessarily too bad, but at the same time, Alabama just didn't look good in the secondary. They didn't look good on the defensive line, the offensive line, quarterback, receiver. I've just never seen something like this out of Alabama. The fact that Florida State, Tommy Castellanos only completed 9 passes to beat Alabama is actually insane to me. Alabama drove down the field their opening drive and scored a touchdown. They had over 50 yards rushing on their first drive. They proceeded to have less than 40 the remainder of the game. Florida State looked more well coached, well prepared. They bullied Alabama. This is the most shocking game of the weekend by far to me. You could make an argument like Ohio State would have beaten. You could have flipped a coin and you wouldn't have been surprised if every game that I talked about before would have went the other direction. Nobody would have been shocked if Texas beat Ohio State. Nobody would have been shocked if Clemson beat LSU or if Notre Dame beat Miami. Nobody would have been shocked about that. Everybody expected Alabama to steamroll this Florida State team that went 2-10 the year before. I will say this, even though I'm a Miami fan, the Florida State faithful, the athletic director, and the institution in general, the fact that they still rallied behind head coach Mike Norvell to right the ship after a terrible 2-10 season, hats off to them for that. I was one to believe that. I thought Mike Norvell was a good coach. Even last year when they went 2-10, I didn't see there was any reason to let him go just because of, he nearly made the college football playoff. Jordan Travis doesn't get hurt. They were in the college football playoff the year prior. So, again, I think last year's Florida State team needs to be studied of how far off they fell. But just the fact that they had Alabama come into their home stadium and they bullied them for a whole hour. Tommy Castellanos, he talked so much smack about Alabama, and everybody on Twitter, on whatever, on social media in general thought, like, what are you doing, dude? Like, can you play the game first? Like, don't open your mouth about Alabama. But, he backed it up. 9 of 14 passing for 152 yards, but he had 16 carries, 78 yards, and a touchdown. Tommy Castellanos is a fine quarterback. He's a very, very shifty quarterback. Kind of reminds me of Kyler Murray, but not as good of a thrower. Kyler Murray was like one of a kind when it comes to that. His, quickness and, short spaces on especially his arm and his accuracy. Kyler Murray was another animal when he was at Oklahoma, but Tommy Castellanos does have a lot of those same traits. That shiftiness, that quickness in like short spaces to maneuver. He doesn't have the arm, but he does have the athleticism. I am more than impressed with Florida State, what they were able to do for Alabama. Now, where does Florida State? I think they're on the up and up, and I think they'll be okay for the remainder of the year. Maybe they even announce themselves as contenders in the ACC, possibly to make the college football playoff. We're going to find out, but it certainly seems that way. I feel like Mike Norvell's really turned that program around now. Now, on the flip side, what do we do with Alabama and Kalen DeBoer? Well, Kalen DeBoer, if he wasn't on the hot seat already, he's on the hot seat where his rear end has third-degree burns at this point. He possibly will not even make it through the rest of the season. If Alabama loses to Florida State, which they did, 31-17, I'm looking at the remainder of their schedule. Louisiana Monroe, then Wisconsin, Georgia, Vanderbilt, Missouri, Tennessee, South Carolina, LSU, Oklahoma, Eastern Illinois, and then Auburn. After this, it would not shock me now if Alabama can lose to Wisconsin. I do believe Wisconsin can beat Alabama. Georgia can beat Alabama. Tennessee can beat Alabama. South Carolina, I feel, will beat Alabama. LSU, Oklahoma. So that is 6 more games. Realistically, 5. I'll take Wisconsin out. But Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, LSU, and Oklahoma. Those are 5 games right there that I can easily see Alabama losing. And that would put Alabama at 6-6 on the year if they were to lose those 5 games and win the rest. That'd put them at 6-6. Realistically, I think Kalen DeBoer, it's put up or shut up time. He's going to probably have to run the table if he wants to keep his job. It is college football playoff or bust for Alabama and for head coach Kalen DeBoer. If he does not make the college football playoff, I think he will be fired at the end of the year. Realistically, if he has his team in a position where he's pushing 500 by the time Halloween rolls around, by the time of that South Carolina game, if he's 5-3, 4-4, I think he may not even make it to the end of the year. I think there's a good chance that Kalen DeBoer will get fired by the end of the year. I don't think Alabama's going to be good at all this year based off their performance because they got bullied for a whole hour in Tallahassee. This game was not close. 31-17. If Florida State doesn't muff a punt, Alabama has no chance. That's the only reason Alabama had a chance in the first place to stay in the game is because of that muffed punt. But it wasn't to be, and I do think Alabama, head coach Kalen DeBoer, he's on the hot seat right now. If he doesn't right the ship, he may be fired by the end of the year. And that's going to wrap it up this week on The Lake Show, everyone. Again, I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day. Be sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends, leave some comments down below. I'm your host, Dominic Lako. God bless.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want, and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no, I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out, maybe it's the chemistry. It's time to break up so I can make a better